I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me. I feel a divine jealousy for you, for I promised you in marriage to one husband, to present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by its cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you submit to it readily enough. I think that I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles. I may be untrained in speech, but not in knowledge. Certainly, in every way and in all things, we have made this evident to you. Did I commit a sin by humbling myself so that you might be exalted, because I proclaimed God's good news to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. And when I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for my needs were supplied by the friends who came from Macedonia. So I refrained and will continue to refrain from burdening you in any way, as the truth of Christ is in me. This boast of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. And what I do, I will also continue to do, in order to deny an opportunity to those who want an opportunity to be recognized as our equals in what they boast about. For such boasters are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is not strange if his ministers also disguise themselves as ministers of righteousness. Their end will match their deeds. And this is the word of our Lord.
Thanks, Jack. I'm going to start this out by saying I am perplexed and confused and amazed, Joyce, at whatever you were able to conjure up here. Simply because I always feel like whenever I have candy to give away, I'm taking my life in my hands. And somehow you were able to create an environment that wrangled them into chilling out. And they walked. So good on you. Send me notes. Today we're going to continue our Power and Responsibility series. We've started to take a look at this idea of where we get our power. We talked about locating our authority in Jesus Christ. We talked a little bit about if we locate our authority in Christ, the fact that sometimes we can even be misguided under that banner. We talked about spiritual bullies, spiritual sideliners, and spiritual warriors. And we talked a little bit about if we go the route of the spiritual warrior, what does it look like when we stand up to an upside-down power dynamic that we have in our culture as compared to the kingdom of God. And we talked about that when we do that, even Jesus, when he was in his most confrontational moments against the powers that be, was able to overcome and bring forth his message by using a combination of humility and compassion, balanced with a spirit of boldness and not giving in, and also making that known through his presence. His presence both physically amongst the people, also a spiritual and intentional presence by paying attention to what was going on around him so that he knew when to exercise that sense of authority that he had. This week, we're going to look at some roles that we have in a congregation. Now, before we get into this, how many of you would agree that when it comes to faith and it comes to life, we're all just kind of in this together? Okay? That we're trying to figure this out as best we can, and that we're going to butt up against each other. There's going to be some confusion from time to time. But that in the spirit of Christ, we work it out, we love it out, and we keep moving forward united as the people of God. And what we're going to talk about today is leaders and more specifically followers. Now, those roles can get confused sometimes. In fact, sometimes we're following and end up realizing that we're in leadership. And sometimes we start out in leadership and realize following the lead of somebody who kind of rises up in the midst of a circumstance to provide us with direction. So we're going to start out with that understanding and then move forward and look at just sort of a general idea of what it means to be empowered to follow. Now, before we get into what it means to be empowered to follow, I always figure that if we're going to address something, we've got to ask the question of, why does this need addressed to begin with? And I'd like to start by just, I guess, raising the awareness of a cultural or social trend. How many of you have heard it pushed to the kids, to every single one of them, you have to be a leader. Don't be a leader, be a follower, be a leader. And you see it in auditoriums, and you see it in classrooms, you see it all across the world. We're telling every single one of them, you have to lead. Does anybody see a problem with that? Okay? There's a few issues with that. One is that all leaders and no followers is chaos. And the other is that it devalues people on a base level, because not all of us are equipped or wired to be in leadership. Now that's not a slam, mind you, because following is as noble and necessary and important, and sometimes more so than being in a position of leadership. I am not qualified, nor am I wired to lead a ballet class. Don't picture me in a tutu. And you'll wish you could. I'm not equipped to lead a construction crew. I am not equipped to be the lead person on figuring out how to put together a beautiful formal dinner. There's a billion things I am not equipped or wired to lead. And you know what? That's okay. Because there's other people that are. And what happens is, if I don't embrace the fact that I'm not equipped or designed to lead in certain situations, if I try to stick my nose into it, I become a train wreck in that mix. But if I can embrace and realize the value in following, if I can understand that my job is to go and simply take direction or be part of the group that's carrying out the task that the leadership is designed, then I become more productive. Because I don't go into it trying to tell everybody what they're doing wrong. I go in and say, tell me what you need me to do. And that's a good thing. I'll give you an example of it. Months ago, we were changing out the light fixtures, right? And Bill Fiore was heading that thing up. And I walked in, and I just had one question. Show me what to do and how to do it so I don't die. Okay? I'm very well aware that I'm not an electrician. That is not my skill set, but also very well aware that if I could be told what to do, I could probably pull it off. And I think that that attitude is something that I need to cultivate more often in my life. We all need to cultivate to realize that being a follower is a good and noble thing. And we also alluded to the fact that too many leaders is chaotic. If everybody in the room thinks that they have the only opinion that counts, and you got 8 people and they all disagree, where's that conversation going? Nowhere. All right? And we get stalled out. But if we can understand how leadership functions and realize that following is a noble endeavor, then we can allow people that are qualified and that are ready to step up and be in that position to take the reins, and then the rest of us can kind of just ask the question, how can we help? And that's part of how things start to function more orderly. We have a great example of how that happens in this congregation. Okay, I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but if you watch the marvel that is the chicken barbecue around here, okay? We have Mike who takes the lead on it and helps get everything together. He organizes it, he delegates tasks, he asks people to go get prices on this, to go pick up that. He helps figure out who's going to go where, who's going to grill, who's going to clean, who's going to peel potatoes, who's going to bake cakes, and all these different things. All these things that the leader needs to do. But he's not doing it all himself. Like, what would happen if you tried to peel all the potatoes, get all the stuff, grill all the chicken, serve everybody, collect all the money?
I'd be 6 foot under.
So we have this well-oiled machine where Mike takes, and there's leaders even within kind of that delegation. You know, there has to be. Mike was kind enough to put me out there at the barbecue pit last year. You know, if I didn't have guys telling me what to do, I'd probably burn my face off or at least burn the chicken, one or the other. And I got a great chance to learn how the church does this. But there's this understanding that, you know, somebody knows how to get it going from the top and then works its way down. And then once everybody knows their role, right, Mike? The peelers peel, the grillers grill, the dippers dip, the bakers bake. And it somehow all comes together in a wonderful, wonderful way. We also see something else about leadership that's exemplified in this as well. When Mike needs people to do things, does he just stand up and say, on some Sunday when, you know, it's snow-covered and there's not many people here, help me with the barbecue, see y'all later? How many of you have gotten a phone call from Mike saying, hey, can you help me do something here? How many of you have been pulled aside after worship saying, hey, I'd like you to give me a hand doing this? As part of his leadership, he's intentionally pulling people aside and getting them together. Because as Mike said, if he happened to try to put on a chicken barbecue and nobody shows up, that's going to kill him. And we like Mike, so we don't want that to happen. But there's this great example of leading and following in that one event. It's wonderful. We know our parts, we all do our thing, and it comes together very nicely. It works the same way in how we do ministry, and how we organize sharing our faith, and how we organize the business of the church, and how we do every single thing that we do as a community of faith. And what we're going to do today is we're going to use these scriptures to help kind of flesh this out. Because I think we have some great examples of what leaders and followers look like, and it's going to give us some good clues about what it means to go against this cultural idea that if you're not the leader, you're not important, and help us realize that being followers is a huge, huge deal. First of all, if we're Christians, who do we follow? Christ. You don't have to whisper it. All right? The name is right at the beginning of the label, Christ. So we follow Christ, which means no matter what our leadership position, no matter where we fall in society, we follow Jesus Christ. We imitate Jesus Christ. So no matter who we are as a leader, every single one of us is still a follower. But we also see this model of leading and following exemplified in Jesus himself. Jesus was one man. Jesus was the Son of God. But was Jesus the only one proclaiming his message? How many others were helping? We had 12 very close to him, and even more beyond that. When we look at the story of the loaves and fishes, it's saying that Jesus was speaking to thousands that were coming to hear his message. When we look and we see the story of the woman at the well, it's not just that Jesus was hanging out with this woman and that was the end of it. No, when Jesus was talking to her and she realized who he was, she didn't keep it to herself. She became a follower, and she went out and she did what she was to do as a follower. She spread the word of who she had met. And so Jesus, we realized, I'm one person. I'm a leader. But boy, are these followers important. And so he empowered them to go out and to do what they were supposed to do as his followers. He empowered them to go out and do ministry. He empowered them to participate in the life that he was living. He had an understanding of what it means, and the significance of the leader and the follower. One is not a whole lot of good without the other. We see this even to a degree when we take a look at what happens in the book of Acts here. In the book of Acts, we have a lovely description of what happened to poor Judas. I don't know if you were paying attention. I'm not going to repeat it, but read it up. But he met with a very sad and very disgusting demise. Now what that did is it left a hole in the number of apostles. There were supposed to be 12, now there was 11. And so they had to figure out, how are we going to fill this gap? They understood there was a need for leadership. But they also understood that not everybody could be a leader, and that was okay. I also want to point out a sidebar of wisdom here. Jesus as God was one. But when it was time for the apostles to figure out the leadership, what did they do? Did they just elect one person to say, you're it, you're the bottom line? No. They had a group. A council. Does that sound familiar? We have one of those here, right? Church council. Collective wisdom, letting God speak through each of us, because one of us is God, God's self. So then what they do is they say, okay, we know that the followers are important, but we know that we need a leader, so what do we got to do? We got to set out some criteria. Remember we talked about before that we're not all qualified, we're not all designed to be a leader in every circumstance. So they come up with this idea of who are we going to pick? Who are we going to choose from? And so they say, okay, well, we're only going to pick from people that were with Jesus personally for X amount of time. From this time of John the Baptist up until now. Now that makes sense, right? Because you want somebody, if you're trying to push the gospel, if you're pushing the story of Jesus, the message of Jesus, you want people who were there and have a first-hand experience of who Jesus was, what Jesus said, and what Christ's teachings were about, so that it's not watered down second or third-hand information. So they say we're only going to pick people that were with Jesus. This again shows us that the 12 are not the only ones around him. And this is going to be part of the leadership. Now I believe that in addition to affirming the importance of leadership, it also affirms the importance of knowing when we are to be a follower. So by default, whoever was not selected to be in that leading 12 was selected to say, no, you're still here, you're still valuable, we may be the leaders, but we need you to go and do the work of ministry. I'll give one more concrete example maybe. You've all heard of Moses, right? I hope. Okay. A lot of times, when they talk about the law of Moses, and then they talk about the covenant through Jesus, and we're really hitting the two big heavy hitters in the Bible this morning. But Moses, when it was time to build the ark, when it was time to build the tabernacle, did he go running around and try to do it all himself? No. Moses called the people together and said, look, I know you all are following God as well. And God has chosen to speak through me, and he's chosen to give us some plan, but I cannot do this all alone. I need some help. So where's the goldsmiths? Where's the people that know how to dye the cloth? Where's the tent makers? Where's the people that know how to build all this stuff? And he gave them the job to do. And so their service, their ministry, their productivity under God came through as they followed what they were asked to do by their leader, who was Moses. If Moses didn't affirm the need for following, nobody did. Couldn't have done it on his own. And so these things help us. Jesus' affirmation of the need for followers, Moses' affirmation of the need for followers tells us something that we need to do first and foremost in order to empower people to follow their faith. We need to affirm the value of that role. We can't buy into this idea that our culture pushes that if you're not the one at the front, you really don't matter all that much. It doesn't work that way. Bringing to the secular world, I work for a company, and the CEO will go into every orientation class. Okay? We'll just pretend you're the orientation class. Okay? You guys are all now getting ready to do social work. Comes in and says, I want you all to know, around here, first come the kids, second comes the agency, and you all are a distant third. How many of you feel good? Okay? But a lot of times that's how we treat folks who might claim to be followers. And it doesn't take a lot of thinking to realize that if you want to accomplish your primary goal, which in that case was caring for children, you better make sure you're taking care of the people that are taking care of the children. You have to value, you have to recognize the importance of the people that are engaged in your goal, in your ministry, in your mission, and let them know that they're valuable and powerful and loved and necessary as much as anybody else. So we have to affirm the value of following. We say it a lot of times, I follow Jesus. But what does that mean? What does that look like? We're going to get to that next. Because in that story of Moses, even when we think about the chicken barbecue, we get to the next piece of what it means to empower people to follow. It's this simple. We have to allow people to follow actively, not passively. We have to give people opportunity to serve. Leadership has to reach out and say, this is what's going on. This is what we're doing. This is why we need you. This is why you are valuable within the body of Christ. This is why your spirit matters as much as anybody else's in this congregation, as much as anybody else's on this planet. You are necessary to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. Moses did that when he reached out and he didn't sit back and say, okay, I'm just going to get like 2 or 3 people, I'm going to run over here, I'm going to try to knock all this out in a weekend. But he opened it up to the whole community. He gave these opportunities. How many of you realize that we'll serve what we love? Is that a fair statement? We will serve what we love. But what happens if the thing we love doesn't allow us to serve? What happens? My experience is we take our love somewhere else. The worst case scenario is that people come in and they see the church as a representative of Christ, and we say, God wants you to serve, and we don't allow them to serve. The worst case scenario is they say, well, apparently Jesus doesn't want me, and they abandon their faith. The other side of it, which isn't quite as bad, but is sometimes what can happen is people say, well, the church doesn't love me, so I'm going to go find one that will. They don't want my service. So we need to set up those opportunities for people to follow their faith actively. And by doing that, we affirm the role of every single believer. They're empowered. Now there's a flip side to this as well. All right? How many of you have ever asked for help on something and gotten no response? 0. Okay? This is the image that comes to mind. I hope you'll take a little trip into cinema with me. I get the impression, like in these medieval movies, where you get like the soldiers come walking into town and they're looking for someone and they say, "Where's the blacksmith?" And the blacksmith just kind of backs up and kind of looks down at the ground, and everybody else is looking around saying, well, do we sell this character out or not? Do you ever get the impression sometimes when you're asking for help that that's what's going on? Okay? So, as leaders, we have to be offering and inviting, and we do that in a variety of ways. But the other side is, if we're followers, we have to be able to pony up our gifts and our talents and realize that we are wanted. We are needed. Okay, Sandy, can I ask you a question? Because I know with the UMW, you ask for help with a lot of things. When you ask for help, are you asking for help just to be courteous, or are you asking for help because you really want it?
Oh, because I really want it.
Right. Okay. And likewise with anybody else. It's an offering. It's an invitation. It's a welcoming thing. We love you. We want you. We need you. And I want to encourage you to pay attention to every invitation that's made. You hear invitations during the announcements from me. You hear invitations during the announcements from people who are in charge of committees. I'm going to show you some. I see one of these every week. There's invitations all through here. They're in a newsletter, they're on the website, they're through emails, they're everywhere. We look around here, and they're through phone calls that we make to one another and say, hey, can you come and help me? I want you to hear me. If you're in leadership, use every avenue that you can to make the congregation feel included and loved. And if you are hearing those invitations, don't be shy. This is a great opportunity for us to come together, to love together, to build ourselves up as a community of faith together, and to serve our God together. And so that's the second thing. Number one, we need to affirm the value of following. Number two, we need to provide opportunities for people to actively follow. The third one comes with what we see in Paul in Corinthians. In Corinthians, Paul is talking to these people in the town of, anybody guess? Corinth? All right. You ever wonder why is a certain book named a certain thing? Most of the letters is because that's where they were sent. So he's talking to the Corinthians, and he's frustrated. I don't know if you can feel the frustration in Paul as he's writing this letter. He's saying, look, I came to you, I lived with you, I was in the midst with you, I was teaching you, I was loving you, I was giving you the gospel, I was showing you who Jesus Christ is, and I thought you had it, and then I had to go and I had to spread the news somewhere else, and now I get word that some of these knuckleheads come in and you're just abandoning everything that I taught you. He refers to them as super apostles. These super apostles come in, and all of a sudden everything that I told you doesn't mean a thing. And he's warning them, he's cautioning them, and he's loving them through it. And he's saying, look, I came to you and gave you the gospel of Jesus Christ. And these other guys are coming and trying to steal it from you. They're trying to lead you away. One of the easiest things, and I can hear it now, one of the easiest ways to get people to go your direction is to do what? To stir them up emotionally. Right? Anybody ever make an irrational choice when you're upset? I will not ask you to go any further with that. But of course we have. And here's the thing. If I'm up here and I'm trying to give you a gospel, a sense of Christ, a sense of faith, and then somebody comes in after me, and the first thing they do is they come in and they say, I feel really bad that you had Brent up there preaching to you for those years, because he's an idiot. And if you thought some of the stuff he was saying was crazy, well, that's because it is. So you really just pay attention to me, and I'm going to set you straight. Well, if he can get you all worked up that you spent however many years being preached to by a moron who knew nothing about the gospel, that's going to get you in a bit of a tizzy. Are you kidding me? I listened to that guy for how long? And he didn't know what he was talking about? Oh my goodness. Well, thank goodness someone's finally here to set the record straight. Well, let's go follow like Mother Duck. Okay? And if that's the sense, though, that I get when Paul's talking to them, he's saying, look, you were going this way, and then these guys come in here and give you, and you're veering off from the truth. And what he's saying is this. Be careful who you choose to follow. Because if your sense of a follower is affirmed, if we are given things to do to be actively following, but we've put our allegiance with the wrong thing, we're off base. We're spending a lot of energy in the wrong spot. And so Paul is saying, empower people by affirming, empower people by giving opportunity, but also empower by helping one another discern what is the right thing to follow. Who is the right one to follow. And for Paul, that's simple. That's it. And he's given the Corinthians his clear idea of what that means. And that's what we have to do as people of faith. When we look at opportunities, when we look at what we're doing as a community of faith, we have to ask ourselves the question, is this in league with Christ? And if it is, go for it. I'll say this, our church council, probably 6 months ago, did a really cool thing in trying to help us kind of get that idea as a congregation. I think I shared this with you right on the heels of we need to do a little more with this to try to kind of tighten it up. But they were asked the question of, what are the 3 things that this church does well? Where are the 3 areas of ministry that this church seems strongest? Anybody on council remember that question? Okay. If you don't, hopefully this will bring it back. Came up with 3 areas: community, family, spiritual development. Community in the sense of building community together and being part of the community in which we live. Family in the sense of family from the cradle to the grave and ministering to all groups together, encouraging participation together. Spiritual development and those things that help us draw closer to God, whether it's in worship, whether it's in study, whether it's in fellowship. Now, why is that important? It's important because it takes seriously Paul's call to ask yourself, what are you following? Where are you putting your energy? And it says, they said, this is where we find ourselves most called to live out the gospel, to minister the gospel of Christ. And what you see is that a lot of what we do fits hand in hand with that. Yesterday was a perfect example. How many of you were at the bunny breakfast and Easter egg hunt? Why are you being sheepish about raising your hand? It's there. Oh, it was great. It was great. There were families from the church, families from the community, crafts, delicious food, egg hunt. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. And it fulfilled all 3 of those things. It ministered to the community. It helped our own community draw closer together. That's both senses of community. It was certainly a sense of family. We had children, parents, siblings, grandparents, all hanging out in the same room together. And it was certainly, at least, offered a degree of spiritual development. Many of the crafts had an Easter significance beyond chicks and peeps and lambs. We saw some crosses in there. And we also invited everybody that was there and said, hey, if you don't have a place to celebrate Easter, consider celebrating it here with us. It's a good example of where we have clarity, who we're following, how we're following, why we're following. And so we have these 3 major things. Affirm. Give opportunity to actively follow and help with discernment on what you're following. Now, these are all great things. And I'm hoping, like, preparing this, I was taking a lot of this in and saying, boy, you know, as a pastor, where do I need to pick up on this stuff? Both as a leader and a follower. But there's one more piece I want to close with. Because right now what we've talked about it is an inward sense of following. I need affirmed in my role as a follower. I need opportunities to actively pursue what I'm following. I need help in discerning where I'm following, and all of these things are important. But the question then, if we're talking about ministering the gospel to a broken world, is what does that mean beyond our walls? And here's where I think it comes down. My hope is that if we're all here in people of faith, we all are participating in the grace and the mercy and the love of Christ. Every one of us understands what it means that we are forgiven and that we are called. We know what it means to be a part of a community that believes together and loves together and grows together. And while we're all under God's grace, I believe the more we embrace service in that community, the more that grace comes to life through us, and the more we actually feel that grace in everything that we do. And when we do that, it is inevitable that it spills over into other areas of our life. And when we go from here as followers of Christ, as active followers of Christ, as affirmed followers of Christ, and as clear and focused followers of Christ, that grace is touching the world around us, that love is touching the world around us, that we are looking into a broken world and saying, I got something for you, I've got an answer to where the healing comes from. I've got an answer to why it's better to serve than to be served. And you will see it through my joy and through my peace and through my love. And I invite you to come and participate in the same thing that wells that up in me to the point that I can't contain it. Amen?